I had just poured my first cup of coffee, the steam curling into the chilly Charleston morning, when I froze. My name is Lenora Whitfield. I'm 73, widowed for 5 years, and I've always been proud of living independently, of running my own household with care and attention. The kitchen was quiet, except for the hum of the refrigerator and the distant chirp of birds outside the window. That quiet shattered with the sound of my son's voice, raised and harsh, carried through the thin walls as if meant to pierce straight into my chest. "Yeah, it's time to get her into a nursing home. She's just in the way. I'll take care of it," he said. I couldn't move. Every fiber of me wanted to storm into the room, but my legs felt rooted to the tile floor. He continued, speaking casually, as if arranging a grocery delivery. "Mom doesn't have the sense to make her own decisions. I'll fix this myself." The words slammed into me, not like a sudden blow, but like a slow, unbearable pressure that made my chest tighten and my head swim. Betrayal tasted bitter in my mouth, more bitter than I remembered from any argument we'd ever had. My hands trembled around the coffee mug, though I didn't spill a drop. I thought of Joaquin, my late husband, and the words he used to tell me, "Lenora, you are stronger than you know, even if you never show it." Back then they were gentle encouragement. Now they became a quiet battle cry inside my head. For a moment, I simply stood there, listening, my mind racing through decades of care, sacrifice, and patience that had been taken for granted. They thought I was powerless. They had no idea how long I had quietly stored my strength. I stepped back from the counter, heart still pounding, and returned to the living room, the steam from my untouched coffee curling like a signal. Something had shifted, though I didn't yet know what the next step would be. The morning light spilled through the tall windows of my Charleston home, but it offered no warmth. Even in the familiar comfort of my kitchen, I felt a quiet tension, a sense that the house I had built with my late husband no longer belonged fully to me. My son, Raul, had a way of asserting control in the smallest of things, changing the channel on the television mid-show, rearranging the dining table without a word, deciding what meals I could prepare. Each act was subtle, almost polite on the surface, yet it carried the sharp edge of authority. Carmen, my daughter-in-law, often followed his lead, her eyes downcast, her voice hesitant whenever I tried to speak up. She had a careful way of choosing his side without making it obvious, and it stung more than any overt confrontation could. She moved through the house as if I were just another fixture, expecting my patience and compliance as though they were earned by default. Diego, my 15-year-old grandson, was the exception. His presence reminded me of who I was and what I had accomplished. He lingered at my side, asking questions about school or offering to help with breakfast. He still saw me as someone capable, someone who mattered. I wandered through the living room, noticing how my carefully arranged objects had been subtly shifted to fit their routines. My quilts, the photographs of my late husband and our life together. Even the books I had lined along the shelves, all rearranged to accommodate them. For a moment, I felt invisible, a burden in the home that had once been my sanctuary. But as I sank into the familiar sofa, I thought of the decades I had spent working, raising Carmen, paying for her education, caring for my husband in his illness. All those years of patience and sacrifice had built this home and this life, and yet they were mistaken for weakness. My chest tightened with frustration and a simmering anger that refused to be ignored. I realized that reclaiming my dignity would require more than quiet endurance. That Sunday morning, I decided I would reclaim a small piece of control. I preheated the stove and began preparing the breakfast I had always loved. Scrambled eggs with fresh herbs, crispy bacon, and pancakes dotted with chocolate chips. The aroma filled the kitchen, a gentle declaration that I still had choices in my own home. Raul appeared in the doorway, his brow furrowed. Why so much noise so early? He grumbled, voice sharp with irritation. I looked up, calmly met his gaze, and replied, "Just making breakfast. You're welcome to join if you'd like." My tone was soft, yet carried a firmness I hadn't used in months. He muttered something under his breath and stormed off, leaving a small trail of tension in his wake. Carmen didn't intervene as she usually did. She lingered in the corner, scrolling through her phone, pretending to be absorbed, but clearly aware of my defiance. I caught her eye briefly and smiled, a silent message passing between us. I was no longer invisible. Diego bounded into the kitchen, drawn by the smells, and his eyes widened when he saw what I had prepared. "Grandma, this looks amazing," he exclaimed, placing his small hands on the edge of the counter. "Did you make the chocolate chip pancakes like last time?" "Yes, just for you," I said, flipping the first pancake with a practiced flick of my wrist. His grin warmed me more than any compliment could. For the first time in months, I felt the thrill of empowerment in a simple act, cooking what I wanted, speaking in my own voice, asserting my presence without confrontation. As we sat down to eat together, I noticed Raúl lingering by the living room doorway, arms crossed, silently observing but unwilling to interfere. Diego chattered happily about school, oblivious to the tension, and I let myself savor the quiet satisfaction of this small victory. It was a minor rebellion, almost imperceptible, but it reminded me that patience did not have to mean submission. Each calm assertion, each tiny act of independence felt like the first brick in a wall I was quietly building around my dignity. For the first time in weeks, I sensed the anticipation of something larger, a shift in the balance that no one in the house had yet noticed. Later that afternoon, I sat at the dining table, a stack of documents spread before me. The light from the Charleston sun fell across the polished oak surface, highlighting the bills, tax statements, and property papers I had kept meticulously organized over the years. For decades, I had built this home with Joaquin, scraping together savings, taking careful loans, and sacrificing luxuries so our family could have stability. I traced my finger over the deed, the name Lenora Whitfield printed boldly. This house, this life, entirely mine. I leaned back and let my mind wander through the memories embedded in these walls. I remembered the evenings Joaquin and I spent sanding the floors together, the summers painting shutters, the painstaking care to restore the historic charm of the house. I recalled raising Carmen, working weekends, tutoring children to pay for her university, and those sleepless nights tending to Joaquin when he fell ill. Every ounce of effort, every bit of patience had been invested here, yet it had all been quietly taken for granted. My son and daughter-in-law had assumed that my generosity meant submission, that my home and finances were theirs to manipulate. But now I saw the reality: they depended on me far more than I had realized. Raúl's arrogance, his casual plotting, revealed a grave misjudgment. They underestimated the leverage I held. For the first time in weeks, a sense of calm determination settled over me. I could feel the tide of opportunity shifting. My resources, long overlooked, were not just numbers and property, they were power. A quiet thrill rose in my chest as I considered the possibilities. I could act decisively on my own terms, without confrontation, without giving them the chance to object. I gathered the papers into a neat stack, letting the weight of them remind me of all I had accomplished, all I still controlled. For the first time since hearing Raúl's cruel words, I felt more than just frustration or fear. I felt clarity, strategy, and the slow, deliberate pulse of empowerment. Something had shifted, and I was ready to explore exactly how far that strength could carry me. The next morning, I dressed carefully, choosing a navy blouse and comfortable slacks, ready to move with purpose. My first stop was the office of Mr. Hernandez, my lawyer of 20 years, a man I trusted implicitly. His office smelled faintly of leather and old books, a comforting reminder of stability in a world that had grown suddenly unpredictable. "Lenora," he greeted, offering a warm smile. "How can I help today?" I sat, placing the neatly stacked documents on his desk. "I need to review the house," I said simply. "I want to be certain that everything is in order, that no one else can claim any part of it." He adjusted his glasses, scanning the papers. "Everything is perfectly clear. The deed, the taxes, the title, all under your name. Your late husband ensured there would be no disputes. You are the sole owner." A wave of relief, sharp and intoxicating, coursed through me. My home was mine. I could feel the quiet power in that fact, the kind that doesn't shout, but shifts the balance in subtle, absolute ways. Next, I visited Letitia, a trusted real estate agent who had helped my family in the past. She greeted me with a bright professional smile. "Lenora, what brings you here?" "I'm exploring options," I said. "I want to understand timelines, market value, and potential buyers. This is my home, and I intend to make decisions independently." We spent hours walking through rooms, discussing valuation, and identifying serious buyers who could move quickly. Letitia offered her insights with care, pointing out details I hadn't considered: the rising interest in historic Charleston homes, the reliability of certain families, the potential to close without complications. Every suggestion confirmed my sense that this plan could succeed without alerting my family. Driving home, I imagined the steps I would take, the careful coordination that would ensure they remained unaware until the moment of revelation. Risks existed: emotional backlash, confrontation, possible threats. But the rewards, the reclamation of autonomy and dignity, far outweighed them. Sitting back in my favorite armchair, I organized my notes, crafting a timeline, a sequence of actions. Each decision felt deliberate, measured, imbued with control I had not exercised in years. I could feel the tension of suspense, the electricity of possibility. For the first time since that fateful phone call, fear had been replaced with focus, and quiet determination was poised to become decisive action. The following morning, I moved through the house with a quiet precision I hadn't felt in years. I started with the kitchen, arranging my favorite coffee mugs in their usual spots, making sure my spices were where I could reach them without interference. When Raoul strode in, frowning at the counter clutter, I met his gaze evenly. "These are where I like them," I said, calmly. "Please don't move them." He blinked, momentarily unsettled. "I was just trying to help," he muttered, but the usual edge in his voice faltered. I ignored his half-apology and continued brewing the coffee, savoring the subtle shift in energy. Carmen hovered nearby, scrolling through her phone, and I caught a flicker of surprise in her eyes. For once, I wasn't silent, and she noticed. At breakfast, I placed the plates carefully before Diego. "I made your favorite scrambled eggs," I said, keeping my voice steady. Raoul leaned forward, a sharp frown on his face. "She doesn't need all this," he said, gesturing to the table. "Diego enjoys it," I replied softly, my tone unwavering. "And I enjoy cooking it." The room fell into an awkward silence. Diego's eyes lit up, admiration clear in his gaze. He whispered, "Grandma, you're amazing," and I felt a small surge of satisfaction. Later, I enforced another minor rule: no one touches my books without asking. Raoul's hands hovered uncertainly over the shelf before he withdrew, and Carmen gave a guilty glance. Even small assertions repeated with quiet consistency made their control feel less absolute. Throughout the day, I observed carefully, noting each reaction, each hesitation, each uncomfortable pause when I stood firm. Every interaction was a test, a measure of how far I could push without revealing the full extent of my plan. The tension in the house was palpable, but it was a tension I controlled, a subtle counterbalance to the domination that had gone unchecked for so long. By evening, as I tidied the dining table, I felt a growing sense of empowerment, a thrill in testing boundaries, a spark of anticipation. They were beginning to see that I was no longer passive. no longer invisible. And that awareness quiet as it was hinted at the storm to come. The morning sun filtered through the tall windows of the living room, casting warm light on the familiar furniture, now more mine than it had been in years. I had been calm and deliberate for weeks, but today carried a different weight. The sale of my house had been finalized quietly. The buyers were prepared contracts signed and the transfer scheduled. Every detail had been handled with precision. They would take possession in 30 days. The thought of it made my chest tighten with anticipation. Raúl and Carmen descended the stairs that morning, still expecting the usual obedience, the quiet nods, the complacent compliance that had defined so many mornings. Raúl's brow furrowed as he caught sight of me standing in the kitchen, holding the paperwork I had placed deliberately on the counter. "Mom," Raúl said cautiously. "What's that?" I smiled, calm and unshakable. "This," I said, spreading the documents, "is the closing paperwork. The house is no longer ours, it's sold." A stunned silence fell. Carmen dropped her coffee cup onto the counter, eyes wide, hand covering her mouth. Raúl's face drained of color. What do you mean, sold?" His voice cracked with disbelief, then rage. "I mean exactly that," I said firmly. "I chose the buyers carefully. They are a family who will care for this home, unlike certain people who thought they owned it by force." Diego, standing nearby, looked from me to his father and mother with wide, admiring eyes. "Grandma," he whispered, "you did it." His pride was clear, and I felt an unexpected warmth in my chest. For the first time in years, I sensed that the balance of power had shifted completely. Carmen stammered, "But the house? Where will we live? I imagine you'll find a rental," I said evenly. "I've left enough time for arrangements, but the house is no longer under your control. You treated it as if it were yours, disregarding my presence and opinions for too long." Raúl's hands shook as he reached for the papers, almost as if to stop them magically. But it was too late. Every careful plan, every quiet step I had taken, culminated in this moment of vindication. My patience, my strategy, and my self-restraint had been underestimated, and they were learning that lesson now. Diego climbed onto a stool beside me, leaning into my side. "Grandma, you're incredible," he said softly. I wrapped my arm around him, feeling the surge of triumph and empowerment that came from reclaiming my home, my dignity, and my life. For the first time in months, the house felt completely mine again. The fear, the humiliation, and the subtle oppression had been swept away, replaced by a deep, satisfying sense of control. Today they realized they had miscalculated. Today I had won not through anger or confrontation, but through careful planning and unwavering resolve. The morning light continued to pour in, illuminating my victory in golden rays, and I finally allowed myself to smile fully, freely, knowing that the tables had been turned, and this time I would never be underestimated again. The day I moved into my new apartment felt like stepping into a fresh chapter of my life. The sun streamed through the tall windows of the living room, illuminating the open space that was entirely mine. I carried boxes, slowly arranging each item with intention books on the shelves. I chose photographs where they made me smile, my late husband's favorite armchair in the perfect corner. Every decision was mine alone, every placement, a quiet declaration of regained autonomy. Diego arrived that afternoon, eager to help unpack and explore. His eyes lit up as he touched the windowsill and peered out at the small park below. "Grandma, this is amazing," he said, his voice filled with genuine excitement. "I can see everything from here." I smiled, feeling a warmth I hadn't realized I had been missing. We set up the kitchen together, preparing our first meal in this new space. Pancakes for him, coffee for me, and the aroma filling the apartment as Diego clattered utensils with delight. Every laugh, every conversation, every shared task reminded me that family didn't have to be a source of control. It could be a source of joy and connection. I arranged my plants along the balcony, watered them carefully, and stepped back to admire the view. For the first time in years, I felt the simple pleasure of creating a space for myself on my terms. My routines were mine again. Morning coffee, the newspaper at my pace, music filling the rooms uninterrupted by orders or criticisms, sitting with Diego on the sofa later, listening to him chatter about school. I realized how light I felt, unburdened by the subtle oppression that had once dominated my life. This apartment was more than just a physical space. It was a symbol of liberation, a sanctuary for dignity and independence. Each small act, from arranging my shelves to cooking our first meals, was a celebration of freedom regained. And as I watched Diego laughing, I knew that in this new beginning, the warmth of family could exist without surrendering myself. A week after the move, Carmen came to visit, her eyes hesitant but sincere. She had that familiar mix of guilt and hope, the expression of someone realizing the weight of past mistakes. "Mom," she began softly, "I want to apologize for how I acted, for siding with Raúl, for not defending you. I should have seen what was right in front of me." I studied her carefully, noting the genuine tone in her voice. "Carmen," I said, placing a hand on hers, "I accept your apology. But remember, respect isn't given automatically, it's earned. And it must be mutual." She nodded, her gaze lowered, but attentive, understanding that this time things had changed. Diego's school backpack was slung over one shoulder as he bounded into the apartment, grinning. "Grandma, I'm officially living here now," he exclaimed, dropping onto the sofa. His presence brought a warmth and vitality to the space, a reminder that family could be a source of joy rather than control. I smiled, ruffling his hair, and reminded him of our household rules, simple guidelines that ensured respect and harmony. Over the next few hours, conversation flowed naturally. Carmen asked questions about routines, about meals, about Diego's school projects, and I responded freely, aware that I could speak without fear of interruption or judgment. The balance had shifted, not through confrontation, but through clarity, boundaries, and mutual understanding. As I arranged our evening tea on the balcony, the city lights of Charleston glowing below, I reflected on the months that had passed, the subtle oppression, the quiet planning, the decisive actions. Each step had been guided by the desire to reclaim my autonomy and dignity. Now, with my family recalibrated around respect, with Diego safe and thriving under my care, I felt a profound sense of empowerment. For the first time in years, I could savor my life fully, knowing that independence and love were not mutually exclusive. Respect, autonomy, and boundaries had redefined our family dynamics, creating a home where kindness and consideration could flourish, and where I, at last, could breathe freely.